What is up, guys? Rick Cacus here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the exotic weapons in Destiny that need some love, need some tender love and care from Bungie to be functional and usable again. Now, Bungie is going to be introducing their next Sandbox update with patch 2.5.0.2 on February 14th to Destiny. This is going to change a lot of things about the game and is going to finally introduce some weapon buffs and nerfs. One of the 5 goals that Bungie laid out for this particular hotfix is to address some of the issues with a sampler platter of exotics. So Bungie is aware, hopefully, that some of the exotics in the game just are seeing essentially no play. Not in PvP, not in PvE, nowhere, except for people whipping them out basically to challenge themselves and to just have fun. But I think that you should have exotics in Destiny at least be functional, at least be usable in different scenarios, in different aspects of the game. People are buying Destiny every day, and it's pretty unfortunate that there's a lot of exotics in the game that if that's your first ever exotic, you're going to be kind of disappointed. Hopefully Bungie again can address this. Now for this video, again, we're going to be showcasing all of these exotics that I think need some love. These are exotics that I would definitely expect, definitely hope to be addressed and buffed within this upcoming Sandbox updates. Now I'm taking all these weapons through the Archon's Forge just so you can easily compare and contrast these weapons because they're taking on the same activity, but also we're going to be focusing on weapons that are really down in the dumps, are really not doing so well because of the weapons specifically and not outside factors. Now a great example of this is the Red Death exotic pulse rifle. It's a slower firing pulse rifle that when you get a kill, it heals you. Super good exotic, was, at one point a terror in the Crucible. Like, oh my goodness, the Red Death spam was real. However, in the current Crucible meta, fast-firing pulse rifles are favored. The Red Death, doesn't necessarily need any love. It's not bad because of anything it's doing. It's bad because its particular archetype that it belongs to just isn't doing so well in the current meta. The weapons we're going to focus on in the rest of the video, again, the problem is with them, their perks, their damage, their stats, and not other outside factors. So let's get started here with the first exotic weapon that needs some love. It is, yes, the DREG'S Promise. This has been famously one of the worst exotics in the game, and it just has been. It sees almost no play in PvP, almost no play in PvE. However, every time I bring up that it's bad, I always get like 2 or 3 people in the comment section being like, what are you talking about? I love the DREG'S Promise, it's my favorite gun. How dare you, Mr. Khakis, talk shit about this weapon. But I'm sorry to say, guys, it's just not very good, and it's just not very good because of the Trespasser. It had a niche environment before, but the Trespasser comes along and just is the better version of it. It's just the Trespasser is the new hotness. The Trespasser is actually a very fun gun to use, and not only that, it's very effective. If you want to utilize a very powerful sidearm, if you want to give your exotic slot to a sidearm, you're going to give it to the Trespasser instead of the DREG'S Promise. The DREG'S Promise just doesn't have as good of stats. It doesn't feel like it does enough damage. It's harder to get headshots and hits in general because the bullets have kind of a travel time behind them, so they can be very difficult to land your shots, and it's just not a very effective weapon. It doesn't feel like an exotic when you're using it whatsoever. It has trouble taking down even baseline enemies. Now what I think the DREG'S Promise needs is just a good old-fashioned damage buff, and specifically a PvE damage buff. We're going to talk about damage increases later in the video as well, and Bungie has specifically isolated damage buffs to PvE. Guys, they've done it before. They've buffed shotguns and, you know, pulse rifles and auto rifles, they can buff specific weapons in only PvE activities. They increase the damage it deals against minions of the darkness, and that's what I think you need here. You could definitely suffice with an overall damage increase. This thing is not seeing a lot of play in PvE. It's being held back by so many factors, by the bullet travel time, all this stuff. It doesn't have the stats to make up for it. It needs to be able to actually kill the targets that you're hitting when you hit them. Now, moving on, the next exotic weapon that needs some love is the Young Wolf's Howl. This is the new exotic sword that was introduced in the Rise of Iron expansion. It's a relatively easy exotic weapon to acquire, and it's actually not that bad. You know, a lot of beginning players are going to have access to the Young Wolf's Howl. It kills a lot of enemies just with its normal slash attack baseline enemies, and its exotic ability is really what we're going to be looking at here. The exotic ability is called Howling Flames. Now, this exotic ability is activated when you press the appropriate button, depending on what console you're on, just like the other exotic swords. Unlike the other exotic swords, this exotic ability, and what it does is that you basically slam the ground, it does some area of effect damage, it weakens enemies, they take more damage from other sources, and it leaves a lingering fire that damages enemies for a little bit. All of this together is actually pretty good. Like, straight up being able to Howling Flames the ground, take out 3+ enemies with a single smash, it is good. If this is your first exotic, I don't see you being, you know, super disappointed. However, the problem with this weapon is that the other exotic swords are just, like, always going to be better. And the reason being is because the Howling Flames ability takes up 10 heavy ammunition, like 10 heavy rounds, when the other exotic swords abilities take up less. If you're using the solar equivalent of the Young Wolf's Howl, which is the Raise Lighter, and you do the uppercut move, which does a ton of damage, takes out bosses incredibly quickly, that only uses up 5 heavy ammo rounds. And the other exotic swords, the Dark Drinker and the Boltcaster, are the same. They all utilize way less heavy ammunition when they're utilizing their exotic abilities. And it's not like Howling Flames is that much better than the Boltcaster, than the Dark Drinker, than the Raise Lighter's exotic abilities. It's comparable, it might be a tiny bit better in some scenarios, but it's definitely not double the ammunition consumption better. They need to bring the Howling Flames in line with the rest of the swords. I would say make it only use up 5 ammunition, and then you have another exotic sword that people are seriously going to consider using again. But as long as the Howling Flames uses up so much more heavy ammunition, the Young Wolf's Howl will continue to be silent. Howl, silent? It's pretty good. Anyways, moving on. The next exotic weapon we're going over is the Queenbreaker's bow. Kind of continuing with the Fallen themed weapons like the DREG'S Promise, the Queenbreaker's bow, although it's actually decent in PvP, and you'll see some people break out this gun, if you can master this gun, it's very effective in PvP. In PvE, it sees almost zero play. And the problem is that it just isn't effective as a sniper rifle. It's very fun. It's very, very fun to use. Don't get me wrong, but it seems to just not do enough damage for how much it requires to put into enemies. It does have a charge up time, unlike other sniper rifles, and it just doesn't do any phenomenal amounts of damage. It does have great ammo capacity, so it has that going for it. But the problem is that it is very good at killing baseline enemies. You know, thralls, acolytes, dregs, vandals, but so are primary weapons. You're not having any problems with those enemies with your primary weapons. So why would you give up your exotic secondary slot to the Queenbreaker's bow when you could give it to something that is doing so much more damage to higher tier enemies, to bosses, and even just to the lower tier enemies just more efficiently? Now, the Queenbreaker's bow is actually not that far off from being a pretty good usable exotic that people would actually break out in strikes in the Archon's Forge more often if they're not just trying to have fun. And I think one of the main factors is the difference between the two firing modes. The Queenbreaker's bow, for those of you unaware, has 2 different fire modes. One that basically makes it, you know, you should look through one of the scopes, it charges for a lesser period of time, but it fires a less damaging, shorter range shot. The other, marksman scope makes it charge for a longer period of time, but it fires a higher damage dealing, further range shot. But the difference is pretty minor. If you switch to the higher damage dealing marksman sight, you are just killing the same enemies you're already killing. It's not like now you can kill higher tier enemies. You can't. You still have to double shot knights and captains and all that stuff. You're basically, again, killing the same stuff you were already killing, but just with a slower charge time. They should introduce a lot more damage to that marksman sight. Give you a reason for switching off of that quicker recharge time with some actual punch, so you can take down some of the higher tier enemies like a lot of the other sniper rifles, and especially exotic sniper rifles, can within the game. Now moving on, we have the No Land Beyond. This is one of the most unique weapons in the entire game, so I've got to give it props for that. And it's okay in PvP, it's actually more than okay in PvP in the right hands. However, imagine getting the No Land Beyond. If you just bought this game, the No Land Beyond is your first ever exotic weapon. You try to play a strike with it, you're going to be like, what is this crap? It has so many flaws. It shoots incredibly slow, and mainly, it doesn't deal enough damage. Again, you are only taking down base tier enemies with the No Land Beyond. Yes, it can kill DREG'S and Vandals with a headshot, but again, that is what your primary weapon is for. Well, I guess, this is also a primary weapon, but I would love to see the No Land Beyond just get a simple damage increase in PvP. This would actually be a pretty fun and actually effective weapon to run if you wanted to run a different secondary weapon. If you want to almost main a sidearm or a shotgun during a strike, which can definitely be effective, but you still want that sniper rifle backup, the No Land Beyond should be the obvious choice. But because it does so little damage for a sniper rifle, and because it's so bad dealing with those higher tier enemies and especially bosses, it's just not a realistic thing to run, and it's really disappointing. Again, a simple PvP damage buff or making this weapon's exotic perk actually do something. When you get a kill and you get another kill and trigger that exotic perk, it gives you basically no bonus. It's negligible. Mess around with that exotic perk, give it a substantial damage increase, and then we're actually looking at maybe a decent weapon that people would start to run. Next up, we have the super good advice. This exotic machine gun has kind of always been in the background. If you're gonna run an exotic machine gun, the Thunderlord was pretty much always the better way to go, and now with the Abaddon and the Nova Mortis taking up the other elemental slots of the Thunderlord, the super good advice has just become, there's even less reasons to use it now. Now, the super good advice is actually a pretty fun and a pretty interesting exotic weapon. It has the exotic perk, named the super good advice as well, that makes it so that if you're missing targets, it's going to essentially regenerate your ammo. It's going to put those rounds that you missed back into your magazine. Pretty damn good, but the one fatal flaw of this gun is that it has incredibly low stability. Now, you may think that that isn't that bad. I mean, yes, it has a low stability, but all the time you're missing, you're getting those rounds back. And yes, it makes it so that the low stability isn't as bad as it would be without the exotic perk, but the stability is just unnecessarily low. The main problem it causes is that because the stability is so low, it's very hard to get headshots. And in a game like Destiny, where headshots do so much more damage, the fact that you try to point this at a guy's head and it's shooting all around his head means that your damage output just isn't that good compared to, again, most other exotic heavy machine guns. Even the grand spanking new Nemesis Star machine gun that came in The Rise of Iron, and it's also solar, it, cranks up its rate of fire over time, and it just beats out this thing in every regard. It's just overall more accurate. And you don't care if you're getting the rounds back if you're not missing in the first place. That's the main problem with this gun. It needs a drastic stability increase, and then maybe it'll start seeing some play. Continuing from there, the next exotic weapon we're going over is the Boolean Gemini. This gun is just so plain. It's so average. It's like Anne from Arrested Development. If the Boolean Gemini was removed from the game tomorrow, it would take a lot of you quite a few weeks to notice it left. Like, seriously, it is Anne from Arrested Development. There's no other way of saying it. It just is very, very average. It's a 4-shot kill scout rifle, and it's not the good 4-shot kill scout rifle. It's the super low time to kill 4-shot kill scout rifle, so it just doesn't see a ton of play in the Crucible. Bungie did recently add high caliber rounds as a passive perk to this gun. When I say recently, they added it in the last Sandbox update. That wasn't a bad idea. That was a step in the right direction, and it was kind of an interesting way of buffing this weapon by adding a new passive perk. So I hope they kind of do that thing more often, but still this weapon just doesn't do enough to see any sort of play. You've got to always ask, you know, is there a reason to give up your exotic slot, which can go to a very useful weapon, the Galahorn, the Sleeper Simulant, the Black Spindle, now with the Icebreaker. There's so many good exotics. Why would you give up your exotic slot to the Boolean Gemini? You can easily find a legendary scout rifle that does all the Boolean Gemini does and more, probably, that has better stats overall, quite frankly. The Boolean Gemini's exotic perks, increasing your armor if you get body shots, and then increasing your agility if you get headshots, they're pretty minor, they're super minor increases. Again, it just doesn't do enough, it's very average, there's no reason to give up your exotic slot for it. It needs some love, it needs a buff. I would love to see its exotic perks buffed so that they actually do something substantial, so that you notice them occurring, and it makes quite a difference when they're gone. Alright guys, now the last exotic weapon, well actually the last bunch of exotic weapons that we're going over today, we're starting with the Ace of Spades hand cannon. This is the gunsmith exclusive weapon to the hunter. And in fact, you could include all of the gunsmith class exclusive exotic weapons in this category, because frankly, all of them are pretty underwhelming. But I think the Ace of Spades is kind of the most underwhelming of an underwhelming bunch. The Ace of Spades, it's actually a pretty okay hand cannon with the base of things. It has Third Eye as a passive perk, it has Firefly, and it has the exotic perk Maverick, so that when you get a kill with this weapon, a precision kill, you get 1 round loaded from the reserves back into the magazine. So if you just keep getting precision kills, kill a bunch of thralls, you're going to essentially never have to reload. But the thing is, whoop-de-doo, right? That's the problem with this weapon. The exotic perk is something that you don't even really need. It's not that hard to just kill, 10 or 11 thralls just with this weapon normally and then just reload. Like a legendary hand cannon that is in the same damage category and probably has more useful perks overall is going to kind of just be doing the same thing, but every once in a while you just have to reload. Reloading is not that negative of a thing. Now with that being said, the ability to get ammo directly from your reserves into your magazine and not have to reload is useful. But it happens so mediocrely. Like, there's no other way for it. It only happens when you get a precision kill. So it only happens when you're fighting those baseline enemies. And again, so what? It's not hard to take down acolytes and thralls and the other kinds of enemies that get killed by 1 precision shot from the Ace of Spades. All you need to do to make this weapon actually start to see some play, I think, is change the word kills to the word shots, precision shots, where every time you get a precision shot, it loads 1 round from the reserves into the magazine. Now we're talking. Now, when you're using this weapon against a boss, you can basically go infinite. It's kind of like the No Time to Explain. That gun, as a pulse rifle, can just shoot a boss in the head over and over and over, and you'll never have to reload. It doesn't even take it from the reserves. It goes out of thin air. And even then, the No Time to Explain kind of doesn't see a ton of play right now. It's not on this list because it's still definitely usable, but you can kind of see my point here. The Ace of Spades is just a much, much worse No Time to Explain, and the No Time to Explain doesn't see a ton of play, so of course the Ace of Spades sees almost no play. Again, just change the word kills to shots, and we have an actual decent hand cannon that is really vying for a top slot in terms of PvE usability. Alright guys, now that is going to conclude my list of exotic weapons in Destiny that need some love. Hopefully these weapons will be addressed with the upcoming Hotfix 2.5.0.2. But what do you guys think? Do you think there are other exotic weapons that I didn't go over that desperately need a buff? Or do you think I was a little too harsh on a certain exotic in today's video and that exotic is perfectly fine and doesn't need a buff? Let me know in the comment section down below. By the way guys, this list was compiled just mainly from personal experience in using pretty much all of the exotic weapons in the game all the time, and also just from what I've seen. These are the weapons that I see almost no one using in strikes, in the forge, especially in the raid, my god. And I think they just need some, again, love, some care to be viable in PvP and PvE. So guys, if you enjoyed this video and found it interesting, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you want to see more Destiny content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good day.